Oh nice, an anime about ping pong. But that'll look really cool animated. Wait, what is this? What is this animation? Oh no. That's a real transcript of my thought process while I was watching Ping Pong the animation for the first time back when it was released in 2014, before promptly dropping the show. Up to that point, the only anime I had seen were Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Attack on Titan, and One Punch Man. So needless to say, 2014 me was kind of spoiled in the animation department. However, as my anime taste matured over the years, then a few months ago seeing a clip of Ping Pong the animation being shared around as always, I decided to dive back into the series more open-minded than before. And boy am I glad I did. You see, Ping Pong the animation is like that niche anime that is really good, but alienates itself from mainstream popularity by going against the grain in terms of animation and storytelling. On one hand, that's great because it caters to its themes and tone, but on the other hand, many people get turned off by the show and don't give it a real chance to experience it for what it is. I imagine that a lot of people probably had a similar reaction as I did when watching for the first time, before ultimately dropping the show as well, which is a shame because it became one of my favorite anime once I watched it all the way through. Ping Pong the animation may seem like a weird, quirky anime about the obscure sport of ping pong, but in reality, it's a super emotional and wholesome show, centered first and foremost around the struggles of success, failure, mediocrity, and acceptance, and a show about ping pong second. Obviously, many of these themes are touched upon in other sports anime, but Ping Pong the animation delves deeper into these themes than any other anime, let alone sports anime I've seen. Now, because this video is kind of a long one, I'll put timestamps in the description below for each topic I cover so that you can skip around to whatever you're interested or not interested in. For the first portion of the video, I'll go over events from the first episode for those who haven't seen the show yet and may be on the fence about picking it up. There's not too much to spoil, as the first episode is mainly just establishing basic character backgrounds and framework, but if you want to be safe, then just pause the video, watch the first episode, and come back. At that point, you may as well just watch the other 10 episodes, but hey, you do you. Then I'll give you a warning for when I'm about to go into heavy spoiler territory for the rest of the series afterward. So, without further ado, let's get right to it. The opening 20 seconds of the first episode shows some comic book-esque text that seems like some motto from a hero, which then the hero in question is revealed as this robot flexing its metal and bolts before growing wings and flying off. This is an interesting opening, but it has absolutely nothing to do with ping pong. This is the first clue that this show's focus goes beyond the sport. Later on, we learn that this visualization is associated with one of the main characters, Makoto Tsukimoto, commonly referred to as Smile. This nickname is ironic since he never smiles, nor does he show any other emotion for that matter. This opening has much to do with his development within the story later on, and it's beautiful to finally see everything come full circle when we learn why this obscure robot means so much to our protagonist, Smile. Then, we have Smile's best friend counterpart, Peiko, who sort of serves as his foil due to his eccentric nature. He is introduced off-screen by his teammates talking trash about him to Smile for always skipping practice. This goes as far as the captain of the team explaining to the coach that Peiko is terrible with showing up to practice, but gets away with it because he's our ace. We are finally introduced to Peiko at a local ping pong dojo, just chilling and hustling people who are obviously worse than him. We immediately get this feeling that Peiko has a little bit of that rebellious, arrogant, but extremely talented character archetype going on. He makes a claim about how he'll go to Europe to go pro, and how he'll be #1 someday, but those comments seem a little bit off base coming from a guy who's just slouching around at a ping pong dojo instead of actually practicing with the school team. Smile comes in and tells him to come to practice, and so the following scene we see them practicing together at school, but then the coach makes note of how Smile seems to be playing with less intensity than normal. This is the first indication that, for whatever reason, Smile does not have a competitive drive when playing with Peiko, alluding to the fact that Smile doesn't really care much about ping pong on a competitive level. The contrast between Smile and Peiko's personalities is also paralleled by their playing styles. Peiko is an aggressive attacker, while Smile is a defensive chopper. What this means is that Peiko sets the pace by being the one mainly trying to end the point with fast shots, while Smile plays a more patient game just trying to get the ball back and forcing a mistake in others. This mirrors Peiko's impatient, assertive nature, and Smile's analytical, passive nature. As we'll learn later on in the series, this stark difference in their personalities is actually part of why they're such good friends in the first place. Peiko, being unsatisfied with how pathetic the team practices, convinces Smile to skip the next day to go see a Chinese exchange student, Wenge, from another school. Kong was some sort of star from his provincial team in China before being dropped from the team due to some vague mistake he made, implying that he probably just lost a big match of sorts. So, he was recruited by another Japanese high school to help elevate their team. On the train ride to this other school, after some back and lack of forth between Peiko and Smile, Peiko asks, "Is the next stop ours?" To which Smile replies, "The stop after next." This exchange is repeated whenever they're on the way home at the end of the episode. These two simple lines help lay the foundation for the dynamic between these two. Peiko is shown to be more carefree and lacking the details, whereas Smile is more calculating and is there to keep Peiko in check. When they arrive at the other school, they stumble across an empty gym, so they decide to hit around while they wait for Kong to show up. While Peiko and Smile are hitting, Kong and his translator/coach are on the balcony upstairs. They hear the distant playing between Peiko and Smile, so they start to analyze the dynamic of their playing. Kong notes how the chopper, Smile, despite having superior skills, seems to be losing on purpose. Kong eventually confronts him, saying,
全力以赴，那才叫尊重对手。
This is just one more example of Smile's lack of drive to win in the sport of ping pong, which is really representative of his worldview and life philosophy as a whole. He doesn't get emotional about things, he likes to stay out of the center of attention, so why would he get emotional about ping pong? Smile is an interesting contrast to the typical sports anime archetype. He's not the underdog who has an unquenchable thirst to win, to get better and to be number one. He just wants to not be bothered. Peiko, on the other hand, sort of fulfills that stereotypical sports anime role, but even he has a bit more nuance in that he wants to be number one and loves winning, but not at the cost of hard work and, as we'll see later, vulnerability. The scene plays out with Kong playing Peiko and skunking him, which clearly emotionally distressed Peiko. Kong then tries to entice Smile to play before getting rejected with the words,
どうせ負けますから。
Unclear about whether he meant Kong's or his defeat, this is the last of many examples in this episode representing Smile's passive nature, further establishing his lack of competitive drive in the short 23 minutes. Speaking of which, of the 23 minutes in the first episode, roughly 3 of those minutes is dedicated to actually playing ping pong. That's less than 15% of the episode. Compare that to my other favorite sports anime, Haikyuu, and you'll notice a stark difference. The first episode of Haikyuu has a total of just under 12 minutes of volleyball gameplay, making up over 50% of the total runtime of the episode. This difference in focus is seen right from the beginning of each episode. Ping Pong the animation starts out with that out-of-context, fantastical robot sequence, whereas Haikyuu starts out with Hinata on the volleyball court, talking about his dreams and aspirations in the sport. Don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with either approach. I love Haikyuu, and I mean I love Haikyuu. From the animation to the characters, to Yuki Hayashi's music, the guy who's also behind the music from My Hero Academia, it's all great. I can make an entirely separate video about that as well. But the two shows are about as different as it gets. Pretty much the only thing the two shows have in common is that they're both in a sports setting. Haikyuu is a little bit more generic in story structure and characters, though it does all those elements excellently. It's a show about volleyball first and characters second. Ping Pong, on the other hand, deviates from the sports anime formula so much that even I, an avid fan of the sport of ping pong, was put off in the beginning and dropped the show when I first watched it. It's a show about characters first and ping pong second, and after finally embracing the show, that's so refreshing to see of generic sports shows and movies. So you get the idea, this show is different from other sports anime, but what about the themes I mentioned earlier in the introduction? Well, to get into that, we'll have to cover more heavy spoilers for the rest of the show, so if you want to avoid spoilers, go ahead and skip to this part of the video. Ping Pong the animation makes an effort to flesh out many of its side characters, from their motivations to the struggles, then by the end of the series, their acceptance of it all as well. The show goes as far as to give a no-name character screen time, where he tries to find himself in his place in the world after getting skunked by Smile in a match. He decides to quit ping pong and to try to find a new passion elsewhere, at the sea, the mountains, the desert, before finally returning to ping pong where he watches Smile and Peiko playing in the finals of the tournament. He then cries as he realizes that his passion had been with ping pong all along, begging for forgiveness from the sport as if it was his ex. Despite his mediocrity and failure in the sport, he comes to accept his place in life and returns to the sport of ping pong. Amazingly, the show manages to make a character with less than a couple minutes worth of screen time total one of the most relatable characters in the show. These themes of success, failure, mediocrity, and acceptance are explored even deeper with the show's main cast. One of the main characters is Ryuichi Kazama from Kaiyo High School. Despite his wild success and sphere of influence in the world of Japanese high school ping pong, he had a troubled upbringing that seeps through his daily life. His parents used to own a florist shop, but it eventually failed, which brought shame to their extended family, especially to the grandfather Ryu Kazama. This led to many from that side of the family to constantly disrespect Ryuichi's immediate family. This shame and embarrassment led to his father to presumably commit suicide by jumping off of a cliff. Then, his mother got sick with some sort of disease. His family's shame with the failed business, his father's suicide, and his mother's health condition led to Ryuichi turning to ping pong as his main tool to demand respect from his family, since that was the only admirable thing that he was able to do as a child. Because of this, he eventually devoted his life to ping pong in order to be the best and to silence his family's critics. He uses ping pong as a tool to regain his family's respect and to get over his trauma from his father's death. Kazuma's resentment toward his father is also shown when Yuri brings in flowers to the bathroom while he's taking a bath, to which Kazama says, "You'll get pollen on you." He says this as if it's a negative thing and that the flowers should be avoided as a result. He focuses on the practical aspects of flowers instead of their beauty. Later on, we see this idea introduced to Kazuma by his father in a flashback, where he says,
野ゆりだ。
花粉がつくよ。野よりの花粉は油っぽいからなかなか落ちないぞ。でも父さん大好きな花だ。
Kazuma only focuses on the negative from his father's sentiment instead of his father saying that he loves the wild lilies, despite the pollen. And that makes sense since that memory also shows his father's suicide. The memory is tainted with the trauma of witnessing his father's suicide, so he views everything at that time in a negative light. However, this was clearly an unhealthy motivation, as it led to Ryuichi isolating himself from his family, specifically his mother and his cousin Yuri. He essentially has no friends due to having no social life. Later in the show, Ryuichi's old teammate Sakuma comes to the bathroom where he's holed up like he always does before a match. They strike conversation, which eventually leads to Sakuma asking him who he plays ping pong for. Kazuma replies that he plays for himself, but this is clearly a lie, which annoys Sakuma. Sakuma knows that Kazuma plays ping pong for unhealthy reasons, and that he's only playing to prove a point. However, his attitude and life philosophies all turn around whenever he plays Peiko in the semifinals of the tournament. Peiko's raw enthusiasm and love for the game rubbed off on Ryuichi. In the middle of the match, while Kazuma is getting pummeled by Peiko, he starts to find himself truly enjoying the sport for the first time in a long time. A flashback is played where his father is teaching him ping pong, to which his father asks him, "Is this fun?" He then is shown with a huge smile for the first time in the entire show. He had been shown to be relatively stoic and never really finding joy in anything up to this moment. However, by match point for Peiko, Kazuma is asked if everything is okay since he takes a pause before resuming play. Kazuma simply responds, "No, I feel good." Despite having been obsessed with winning in ping pong before this match, when faced with defeat at the hands of Peiko, not only does he accept defeat, but he embraces it. Peiko's enthusiasm broke through Kazuma's cynical shell. After this match, he continues to play ping pong, but from that point on, it's implied he finally plays for himself as he seems to be generally more content with his life. Years after the tournament, Ryuichi comes to visit Smile at the dojo. While he's visiting, he brings flowers for old lady Tamura. He's seen with a full head of hair and wearing a suit. Even though he still devotes his life to ping pong and even gets kicked off the national team, he seems more satisfied with his life than before. Unlike when Sakuma approached him in the bathroom, Kazuma's finally playing for himself. His shift in life philosophy is symbolized by his willingness to bring flowers to old lady Tamura, showing that he's finally starting to get over his fixation on the negatives and practicalities of life, and that he's finally accepting and moving on from his family's past. Despite all of the success that Kazuma had throughout his youth, he was never happy because that success was driven by a toxic motivation. It took failure at the hands of Peiko to wake him up from his negative outlook in life, to finally accept his family's past, and to finally enjoy playing ping pong again. Sakuma is first introduced as a rival to Peiko. He comes off as aggressive, arrogant, petty, and just overall annoying. However, his character development is one of the most extreme 180s in the show. He starts off as someone who, similarly to Kazuma, is obsessed with ping pong. He grew up playing with Peiko and Smile at the same dojo. He even started to play before Smile and was better than him for a long time. He worked the hardest of the three at ping pong, but that's because he had to. You see, he was so mediocre at ping pong in terms of natural talent that he had to work hard to compensate. This is in stark contrast to Peiko's incredible natural talent, but lackadaisical approach to discipline and work ethic. Growing up, Sakuma had a solid losing record against Peiko, who was the star of their group, but had a solid winning record against Smile, who was still just learning. Fast forward to the present day, Sakuma makes it onto the prestigious Kaio ping pong team, where he further refines his skills by working hard with others who share his same drive. Meanwhile, Peiko is still coasting on his natural talent, and Smile is finally starting to put in the effort to get the most out of his potential. We see Sakuma destroy Peiko, but then he later gets destroyed by Smile. His defeat against Smile crushed his morale because of two main reasons. Firstly, Smile was someone that he had always beaten in the past. To Sakuma, Smile was supposed to be an easy opponent, so losing to someone he had deemed inferior was the first blow to his ego. Secondly, the person he looked up to the most at that time was Kazuma, but Kazuma did little to acknowledge his team, let alone acknowledge Sakuma. In fact, Kazama spent a good portion of the show trash-talking his own team, and actively trying to recruit Smile because he saw his true potential. So, when Sakuma tries to prove himself and gain recognition from his idol by beating Smile, he instead ends up getting beat mercilessly. This causes him to implode as his insecurities lash out at Smile. Smile simply responds with,
それは悪魔に卓球の才能がないからだよ.
Absolutely crushed and demoralized, he ends up getting violent with random people on the street, which leads to his expulsion from the team and school. After quitting ping pong and taking some time off to himself, he visits Peiko, who is also struggling with his humiliating defeat, funnily enough at the hands of Sakuma. He gives Peiko a pep talk, trying to encourage him to continue playing ping pong and to get him back on his feet. This is in stark contrast to Sakuma's entrance to the show, where he's aggressive and destructive toward Peiko, but now is caring and supportive of him. Even Peiko acknowledges this turnaround in behavior, saying that it creeps him out. However, this confrontation undoubtedly plays a key role in Peiko's rise back to greatness, as just minutes later in the episode, after another revelation, he finds a new drive to get back into competitive shape. As mentioned earlier, Sakuma also confronts Kazama while he's in the bathroom and asks him who he plays for, trying to help him work through his motivations and to break his unhealthy mindset, which we see Kazama do successfully by the end of the show. We see Sakuma go from a minor antagonist to Peiko to being the show's moral guide. He helps Peiko recover from his depression and helps Kazama get over his personal conflicts. In the last episode, Smile and Kazama talk about Sakuma, his growing family, and how he's starting his own business. He seems to be living a happy and fulfilling life long after his ping pong career had ended, and this is partly seen whenever he meets with his old teammates with his girlfriend at his side. Briefly, we see them talking, but their banter is light and friendly. Sanada, Kaio's second best player, tells Sakuma that the coach has been worried about him. This is the first time we see Sakuma engaging socially in a healthy way with others, outside of his confrontations with Peiko and Kazama, implying his improved mental state. I think it's safe to say that if it weren't for his failure at the hands of Smile, that Sakuma would not have been forced to re-evaluate his life and to mature emotionally. In the face of failure and mediocrity, Sakuma learns to accept his position and is one of the first from the main cast to do so, which is seen by his more mellowed, supportive, and vulnerable character. Though he did not find success in the world of ping pong, he found success in life by finally coming to peace with himself and settling down with his wife and kids. We were introduced to Kong Wenge in the first episode, as mentioned earlier, as an arrogant hothead, the foreign menace who has come to disturb Japanese ping pong. He serves the stereotypical role of the antagonist from a land far away for the protagonist to simply beat and be done with. Except he's not. Kong Wenge is much more than that. After getting kicked off the team and flying off to Japan, Kong had a lot to deal with. He had the shame of being kicked off the Chinese provincial team, but more importantly, he was leaving home and leaving his mother. As Kong stated in his internal monologue in the first episode, he played ping pong from a very young age and had the success necessary in order to support his family. However, after getting kicked off the provincial team, he was forced to take a position at the Japanese high school in order to continue supporting his mother and to have a chance at redemption and making it back home. He treated Japan like a stepping stone, disrespecting the talent that he had to face. After his defeat at the hands of Kazama, he was humbled and forced to re-evaluate his position. Instead of going back home to China in defeat, he decided to stay in Japan to continue working with the high school. When he's sending his coach off at the airport, you sense a feeling of acceptance in his voice, accepting that he's not the best around even at the Japanese high school level. So, he has to make do and work with what he's got by training with the Japanese high school he transferred to. Later on, we see him receive a package from his mother full of snacks, and in it was a piece of her hair that had accidentally fallen in the package. It was a partially white hair. It then cuts to a scene where she was dyeing her hair, then to a familiar scene of Kong riding the train away from his waving mother without looking back. But as his mother faded out of view, he broke down crying. It then cuts back to the present where Kong is examining the hair, and he starts to tear up again, thinking about his aging mother and how he misses her. This was a gut punch and a half, as, like with Kazama, we finally get a look into the personal drive and motivation that led to Kong being the way that he is. He was extremely proud and arrogant, because he had to be in order to achieve the levels of success to support his mother. However, after his loss to Kazama, he had to take a step back from how seriously he took ping pong, and to try to recuperate emotionally from the loss. In the episode after, we get a super wholesome montage as Kong's mother comes to visit him in Japan for Christmas. They wrap wontons together, a dish that he had said he loved from his mother. Then, the rest of the team comes to help out, and eventually they all eat a festive dinner together. After the dinner, Kong and the team go to sing karaoke while his mother cleans up. This entire sequence just bleeds joy and content from Kong, as he is finally reunited with his mother for the first time in the show, and is actually enjoying himself with the very people he ridiculed when he first arrived. These scenes show his maturation from someone who is using the Japanese high school solely as a tool to get back to China, to somebody who genuinely cares for and connects with the team, and more importantly, by allowing the rest of his team to join in on the bonding time with his mother, he shows that he is able to be vulnerable with them, representing his genuine content with his current life. Later on, he plays and loses to Peiko in the quarterfinals of the tournament, but he has no sense of shame or embarrassment like he did when he lost to Kazama. He simply takes a moment to himself, with a slight smile and his eyes closed, seeming at peace, accepting that this was not his time for success, and that's okay. By the end of the episode, while Smile and Kazama are talking, they mention that Kong was doing well, which then cuts to a newspaper article about Kong's success making it to the Olympics as a Japanese citizen many years after his defeat to Kazama and Peiko. Because of his failure in the form of defeat from Kazama, Kong was forced to mature and learn to have a healthy relationship with ping pong. Though this did not show immediate results, as seen by his loss to Peiko, he would later on end up having one of the two most successful ping pong careers from the main cast. This only occurred, however, after he lost to Kazama and was forced to accept his situation in Japan instead of lamenting it, which led to him actually enjoying himself while improving at ping pong at the same time. Kazama, Sakuma, Kong, even the nameless guy that Smile skunked. All of these characters could have easily been disposable antagonists, whose sole utility to the story was for the heroes to overcome them. However, the show makes an effort to not only give them all backgrounds and motivations, but to make them all relatable and to draw sympathy for them. Kazama, Sakuma, and Kong are way more than just side characters that serve the plot. They are people with their own stories within the world of Ping Pong the animation. They help elevate the story to emotional heights that would have been unreachable if it weren't for their nuance. Enough about the characters, what about the actual ping pong? Well, I'm happy to say that what little ping pong was actually displayed in the show was actually almost completely accurate. Yes, it's a show about characters and their struggles first and foremost, but that does not come at the cost of authenticity and detail to the sport and world of ping pong. To start out, Kong is a Chinese exchange student that was dropped from his provincial team, presumably because of a significant loss, before eventually picking up a coaching position overseas at a Japanese high school. From his departure from the provincial team, to his high prospective value to the smaller Japanese schools, to his notoriety amongst Japanese players due to his status as a former Chinese provincial team player, this entire situation just bleeds realism. It's a common stereotype that Chinese people are good at ping pong, and that stereotype doesn't come from nowhere. For decades, China has been at the top of the sport. To put things in perspective, since ping pong was introduced as a sport in the Olympics in 1988, they have won 28 out of 32 gold medals in the sport, and 53 medals total. Their closest competitor? South Korea, with 18 total medals, with only 3 of them being gold, one of which was ping pong's debut in the Olympics in 1988. The only other non-Chinese gold medal goes to Sweden in 1992, only the second time ping pong was featured in the Olympics, to one of the greatest to play the sport, Jan-Ove Waldner. From then on, it's Chinese domination. The main factor in China's aptitude in ping pong can be traced to their highly organized and intense framework set by the government and Chinese table tennis organizations for procuring and fostering talent. They have scouts for prodigies in the sport starting as young as 5 to 6 years old. 5 to 6 years old. Imagine a college or NBA scout checking out a player, let's just say Bronny Jr. Imagine them checking out his film, checking out his stats, seeing him play in person, and seeing if he'd be a good fit for their team. Now imagine Bronny being a 4-foot tall Chinese kid with a ping pong paddle. Now imagine that, but tens if not hundreds of thousands of those 4-foot tall Chinese Bronny Juniors being scouted a year. Crazy, right? After scouting these kids, they get sent to a special school where they're mainly just sports camps with a touch of education on the side, if even that much. If they excel in these schools, they get picked up for the provincial team, which would be similar to playing college football or basketball here in the States. This is the level that Kong reached before being dropped. Then, if they're especially proficient, they get picked up by the Chinese national team, which even within the national team, there are A and B teams. Does all this sound kind of familiar? It's pretty much the exact system we have here in the States for some of our most esteemed sports in football and basketball, and that's why the US is dominant in basketball in the Olympics, while the Chinese is dominant in ping pong. They both have the best framework in their respective sport, except the Chinese infrastructure for ping pong is much larger in scale due to the population difference, and it's also arguably more effective since they scout and nurture talent at such a young age, which leads to them being much more dominant in ping pong than the US is in basketball. So you can see just how competitive ping pong is in China. It's the best country in terms of ping pong talent, and therefore the most competitive. Those who don't make it in China either hang up the racket or they go to other countries where there's less competition for competing or coaching. So going back to Kong, his story is one that I'm sure many ex-Chinese provincial players can connect with. It is relatively common for provincial or even national team members who couldn't make it very far to go to other countries and quickly rise to the top of that country. Again, drawing the parallel between Chinese ping pong and US basketball, many NBA dropouts or college basketball athletes here who can't make the NBA do the same. They go to play overseas where their expertise is more highly sought after when they can't make it back at home. To give you an example of this in ping pong, we have Lily Yip. She runs a ping pong camp in New Jersey called Lily Yip Table Tennis Center, and it's often heralded as one of, if not the best table tennis club in the nation. Many US national team members have trained and played here. Lily Yip, the owner of the club and a coach, is an ex-Chinese provincial team member from the Guangdong province. For one reason or another, she came to the US in 1987 and would eventually become a monumental figure and influence in the US circuit. Since moving to the US, she's won 4 silver medals in the women's singles and a couple gold medals in doubles, all from the US national championships. And she's participated in the 1992 and 1996 Olympics as a US citizen. As a coach, she would help coach many of the top talents that the US national team has to offer, and would be named the USA Table Tennis Coach of the Year in 2004, 10, and 13. In 2004, she was inducted into the USATT Hall of Fame. Lily Yip is a huge figure in the US table tennis world without a doubt, but it would have been much more difficult for her to stand out in the crowded talent pool back in China, just like it was for Kong, leading to his move to Japan. And lastly, Lily's participation in the Olympics as a US citizen parallels Kong's story where he participates in the Olympics as a Japanese citizen. So the sports culture as depicted in Ping Pong the animation is certainly accurate, as evidenced by Kong's background. But what about the finer technical details? Well, Ping Pong the animation is no slouch in the technique department either. When I watched the show for the first time, I was impressed by the accuracy and details displayed whenever they showed people playing or talking about the technique. On my second go around, instead of spotting flaws, I found more details that I had overlooked before. For starters, the way the characters hold the paddles and their strokes are all very accurate. From the way Smile gets down low for a chop, to the way Peiko hits with the same side of the paddle for a forehand and backhand because of his traditional penhold style. Everything you see here is very accurate. Look at how low Smile gets to chop the ball back to the table. Now, look at how one of the best defenders to have ever played, Choo Se-hyuk from South Korea, chops the ball. Look at how Peiko hits his traditional pinhold backhand. Now, look at how Ru Sung-min, also from South Korea and one of the best ever traditional penholders, hits his traditional penhold backhand. I know, it's ironic. I just finished talking about how dominant and influential China is in the world of ping pong, then I showed 2 South Korean players as models for technique. That's just how it worked out. They're the best at their respective technique in my mind. Anyway, while we're on the topic of penhold, even the rackets designed for penhold in the show are accurate. Japanese and Korean penholders actually differ from Chinese penholders in the way that they hold the racket and even the racket itself. Japanese penhold, shortened to J-pen, is widely adopted by Korean penholders as well, which is why Ru Sung-min is such a great real-world display of Peiko's technique. They only use one side of the racket for both forehand and backhand, and their fingers are either almost or completely extended on the backside of the racket for stability. Their rackets also have a cork block protruding from the handle to provide extra stability, since this style of play relies more on the forehand and not as much on the backhand. What's interesting though is that this style of play has more or less been dying off in recent years. It was quite popular in the 80s through 90s, maybe even a little bit throughout the early 2000s, but you'd be hard pressed to find a J-pen player in the top 50 players today. The traditional penhold backhand, where you have to contort your body and arm at an awkward angle to hit with the forehand side rubber, was not as easy and intuitive to pick up, and it debatably was just less powerful than a shakehand player's backhand. So, while J-pen has seen a major decline in players in recent years, there's still a decent amount of people who play using Chinese penhold or C-pen. The difference here is that C-pen doesn't have that cork block on the handle, and their fingers are usually not extended entirely and are more curled. C-pen started out similar to J-pen, where you used traditional penhold backhand, or TPB for short. But during the mid to late 90s, there was a growing number of C-pen players who started using the backhand side of the rubber in what's known as reverse penhold backhand, or RPB. This would heavily revolutionize how penhold would be played, making it less reliant on the powerful forehand like before, and more of a balanced game, bringing it closer to the strengths that shakehand players had over traditional penholders. The player often credited for pioneering this technique is Liu Guolong from China, who peaked in the 90s before retiring in 2001 at 27 to become the head coach of the Chinese national team. He was the second player to ever achieve a Grand Slam, which is getting gold in all 3 major global tournaments, the Olympics, World Cup, and the World Championships. His success popularized RPB for generations to come, with the likes of Ma Lin, Wang Hao, and today, Xu Xin. In today's highest level of play, TPB is typically reserved for defensive blocking, while RPB is used more for offensive shots. So why am I going into such detail about something as simple as grip? Well, that's because this small detail is critical to Peiko's story arc. He spends the majority of the show playing traditional penhold because that was the dominant style when he was learning. However, he would never really innovate on his game as he grew older because he never really needed to. He just coasted on his raw talent. But as he got into high school and the competition rose dramatically, he was forced into an uncomfortable position of having to actually work to be the best again, and to have to face the reality that he's no longer a big fish in a small pond. Therefore, instead of innovating his game and working hard at practice, he stuck with what was comfortable for him, and that was playing at the dojo he grew up in, hustling beginners, and playing traditional penhold. That is, until he gets beat terribly by Sakuma. During their match, Sakuma comments repeatedly on how Peiko's playstyle is old and outdated, partially due to his reluctance to adopt RPB. And, in the context of ping pong culture in the real world, this makes total sense. Ping Pong the manga was written by Taiyo Matsumoto and was released between 1996 through 1997, which happens to be around the time that Liu Guolong won his gold Olympic medal in 1996 by innovating on the outdated traditional penhold grip with his RPB. So it stands to reason that Liu Guolong's success made waves throughout the entire ping pong community, which is then reflected in the manga and eventually the animated series. Peiko's playstyle was representative of his stagnant attitude toward life and ping pong. He was stuck in the past, unwilling to do what it took to move forward in his ping pong career. When he finally comes back around and commits himself to relearning the sport, we see him change his playstyle dramatically, and part of this change is adopting RPB. His change in playstyle represents his shift in attitude and philosophy, finally returning to form and reclaiming his glory. I could go on and on talking about how the show accurately portrays the sport of ping pong. I could talk about every little detail, but I think you get the point. The show is very true to the sport. My only gripe with the accuracy is that nobody, especially Kong, yells Cho. Ping Pong the animation does a lot of things right. When I first watched the show all the way through, I was blown away by the emotional depth it offered in such a short 11 episode run. Then, after rewatching it for this review, I only grew to love it more. This show was able to be both incredibly comedic and emotional at the same time. Its representation of people's struggles with success, failure, and mediocrity is incredibly realistic and visceral. The exploration of these themes takes center stage in the show, with ping pong being the backdrop. But when the show did decide to focus more on the actual ping pong aspect, it was beautifully true to the sport, nailing many of the details that even fans of the sport may overlook. Failure and ping pong are two areas that just so happen to be my soft spots. For all of my life, I've struggled with never really excelling in anything I do. Mediocrity and failure was something I had to learn to accept in sports like ping pong, but especially in more serious fields like my education. I can't tell you the number of matches I've lost, not necessarily due to being outclassed, but just because I don't play well in matches. And I can't tell you the number of school tests and assignments I failed, not because I'm too stupid, but just because I couldn't bring myself to put in the work necessary. However, once I did learn to accept these failures in my life, to forgive myself and to move on, to not allow my failures and mediocrities to define me, I became much happier because of it. Yes, it's easy to just say that I don't have to accept being average and that it's just an excuse to not work hard, and to a certain extent that's true. I could just work harder, but I know that I'd be less happy if I did spend all day every day only practicing sports or only studying for school. But that's exactly the sacrifice I would need to make if I wanted to achieve some of the things I've held on a pedestal. So yeah, this show really resonated with me. I was able to sympathize with the no-name guy Smile Skunked. I was able to sympathize with the forever cursed with mediocrity Sakuma. I really felt sorry for Kazama's struggle with his family's past. And I couldn't help but to smile from wholesomeness whenever Kong was wrapping wontons with his mother after finally being reunited. This show is about so much more than ping pong, and I think my 30+ minute video is evidence of that. So if you're thinking about picking the show up, I would highly recommend it. Don't let the unique animation and art style stop you, but just know that it's not a show simply about an underdog protagonist rising up to defeat their sports rivals. It's about the human condition and finding oneself. It's about finding success from failure in a world where you're destined to fail even if you do succeed. And that's exactly why I love Ping Pong the animation. This'll do.